very quickly, and I've been noticing the older I get how much faster time moves. Perhaps some of you have similar experiences, and this year seems like as I approach my emeritus status as rabbi of BCC, time is going even more quickly. But I've been really noticing it lately as I've been talking to Rabbi Sharon Kleinbaum about the fact that we met in 1988 in Jerusalem when both of us were rabbinic students. I at Hebrew Union College, Jewish Institute of Religion in my first year, and Sharon a couple of years further along at the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College. And what a blessing it was for me to spend my first year in my tentative steps becoming a rabbi, not yet certain how I could be a lesbian and a rabbi, to meet up with somebody like Sharon Kleinbaum, who was figuring it out and had been figuring it out for a while. And I had the opportunity that whole year in Jerusalem of making my way to Sharon's house almost every Shabbat to study Torah, and for her to be one of my teachers then, and in that first year. And then how lucky Tracy and I were to arrive in New York City for 2 years as I finished my training at Hebrew Union College, to land there just as Sharon Kleinbaum became the rabbi of Congregation Beit Simchat Torah in New York City. And so we got to be her congregants for 2 years as well. It was no wonder then that I invited her 25 years ago to come install me when I was blessed to become the rabbi here at Beit Chaim Charashim. And how many of you were in the room? Yeah, quite a few of you were here for that event. Thank you for being here then and now. I'm going to invite Sharon up here to say whatever she wants for as long as she wants, and in just a moment. Many of you know her already, so. But I wanted to read you just this excerpt from something that was on Facebook recently, written by Sharon, that might give you also a little clue of why I consider her my teacher. It's a story of being present and bearing deep witness, she wrote, about knowing that we can't always change the world, about what it takes to look empathetically into the experience of another and to show up in acts of love and solidarity. It's about knowing that when we sit with each other in pain, we can strengthen and be strengthened. We can transform and be transformed. And we can learn how to live out our awareness that each person is created in God's image. Rabbi Sharon Kleinbaum.
Do some adjustments. Yeah. Wonderful. It's a thrill to be here. It is a little hard to imagine it was 25 years ago I came here to install you. So I'm not sure what this is, whether I'm de-installing you. What's the next thing? Don't unplug you or something. And it's an honor to be here with all of you tonight. And for those of you who have had the extraordinary blessing to have Lisa Edwards as your rabbi, you're facing and going through this year, I know, with a lot of mixed feelings. For a congregation to have a rabbi like Lisa for 25 years is a deep gift. And this community has had this gift for a long time. And now you'll get to figure out what to do with her as emerita for whatever the rest is. And this is an enormous, enormous gift. And when Lisa first called me to ask me to do something in June, when you're going to be having multiple observances and moments of ritual transition, June is in New York, of course, our Gay Pride Month, and it's high holidays in New York for CBST, and none of those dates I could come. But indeed, this weekend is my granddaughter's 3rd birthday, and Liba, my daughter, is here in Los Angeles, so we made this weekend work, and I'm thrilled that Alice and Mark are here tonight. Not only are they Liba's in-laws, but they're my machatonim, and family is family, so I'm thrilled that you are here with us tonight. And to have Liba here is just extraordinary. Zelda, who is our granddaughter, is home asleep, of course, with her father. We hope. Maybe they're watching on live stream. Hi, Zelda. And Liba, there are not many people in the room who could say this, but for Liba's bat mitzvah, Jack Greenberg laned at her bat mitzvah, which was, I don't remember what year that was. Liba, do you remember what year? Many years ago. Jack, I even remember which. You do too. Jack could probably stand up now and lane what he laned then, Jack being the master Balkore that he is. Liba had one of the longest Torah portions in the entire year, Naso, to read, and Jack took on a big section. So it's just amazing to have Jack and Ron here and other CBST members. And of course, I'm thrilled that Randy Weingarten, my wife, is here today. And wasn't here 25 years ago, Lisa, when we installed you, but here today. And I'm thrilled that we're all together. And I want to make a special welcome to all those CBST members who are here in the room. And some of you are dual members. So we like to think of BCC as CBST West or CBST as BCC East. Whichever way, we're very proud that our 2 congregations, we're a little jealous that you get to say you're the oldest LGBT synagogue. So we like to say that CBST and BCC are the 2 oldest LGBT congregations in the world. So we're very happy to share that status with you. I want to say hello and a huge thank you to Tracy Moore. Where is Tracy? Tracy Moore. Would you stand up, Tracy? Everybody here knows Tracy, of course. Tracy was part of our lesbian community in Israel, in Jerusalem, from 1988 to 89, when we had a very below-the-radar lesbian community in Jerusalem, and it was an extraordinary year of learning and of relationships and of community building. And all of us, we studied 3 hours together every Shabbos afternoon at my apartment. All of us remained to different degrees close. And all of us have gone on into the world to teach Torah that I believe is in some ways rooted in those Shabbos afternoon learning experiences together. Not the least of which I learned about brewer's yeast from Lisa Edwards. Lisa and Tracy would always bring popcorn with brewer's yeast on it. Has anybody heard of that? No. What? Yes, of course, Liba, you grew up with it because of me, because of Lisa. That's where I learned about brewer's yeast. But we spent 3 hours together every Shabbos afternoon with the text. But not only with the text, we were doing the radical act of not leaving ourselves at the door when we sat down with these ancient texts of our people. We weren't all lesbians, though we were mostly lesbians around that table. And we didn't leave that outside the room. That changed us as we studied Torah all year together. And it went on to inspire and inform and transform me and Lisa and the rest of our little community of nudniks who were trying to figure out how it was possible to remain deeply committed to our people who on the surface seemed to hate us, but we were determined to make a place for LGBT people. That's a model, I think, actually, of many of the issues we face in the world today. People say to me all the time, how can you engage with people who fill in the blank? Disagree with you on Israel, disagree with you about American politics, disagree with you about any of these issues. If 25 years ago, Lisa Edwards and I stopped talking to every homophobic Jew there was in the world, we would only have been talking to each other. Really. The only way the world changes is especially if those of us who are in the vulnerable and marginalized and targeted groups have the chutzpah to sit down with people who confess and profess either hatred or dislike and say, we will not let you get away with not having to deal with us as real human beings. That's the beginning of the transformation of the world. So how lucky we were to have this experience of studying together in order to have the strength to go out into the world together. Tracy, as a result of that year, wrote an extraordinary book which transformed the way the world thinks about a lot of things, even for people who never read the book, which is that Tracy insisted that the most invisible population in Jewish Israel were the lesbians, which it was true then. And she did an oral history of people she had met in the course of the year in all different settings called Lesbiot. Israeli lesbians talk about sexuality, feminism, Judaism, and their lives. Again, just creating a space for people to tell the real stories of their lives by insisting on the right of that space to exist changes the world. So this month we are in right now is called Adar, which is the first month of the leap year month of the month of Adar. We're in Adar 1. We're going to go into Adar 2 in a short amount of time. This past week we observed Purim Katan, small Purim, and in the second month of Adar we're going to observe Purim. And so we are right now nestled or hovering between the two Purims. Purim 1 and Purim 2, so to speak. I want to say a few words about Purim, as I think it has some deep wisdom for us today. I used to teach about Purim all the time as being a story about coming out. That Esther, the word for hidden, was the story of a person that needed to stay in the closet, get into a position of power, and then at the right time know when it was the right to come out and to use that power. And not one person can tell another person when they should come out and when they should choose to reveal themselves. That used to be the story I would teach on Purim in all different kinds of ways, with all different kinds of psukim and midrashim and quoting this and quoting that. This year, I think that Purim has a different story to tell. And I think that it relates to Lisa Edwards, but we'll get to that in a minute. There's a famous verse in the book of the Megillah, the book of Esther, when Esther is very reluctant, if you remember the story, of actually taking on the king. She's in this position. She's living in the kingdomship, whatever it's called, the palace. Thank you. That was a big word, the palace. And she's kind of made it, right? She's made it. She's in a position of power. She's living with wealth and with comfort, and her nephew, her uncle, her cousin, whatever Mordechai is, we're going to leave that aside for now. Mordechai says to her, Umi yodea, who knows? Im la'et kazot, maybe it is for this moment, he got lamachut, that you've arrived to be in this place. He says to her, maybe you were actually created. Maybe your entire life was about getting you to be at this point because you have something to offer the broken world in which we find ourselves that no one else can. Maybe. Who knows, he says. Who knows? Maybe I'm wrong, but maybe I'm right. I believe this to be true. If you are alive at this moment in human history, and that means I'm speaking to everybody in this room, because as far as I could tell, everybody here is alive. If you happen to be alive at this moment in human history, it's because God has a plan for you. Let me put it a different way. If you happen to be alive at this moment in human history, it means you have something to offer the world that no one else has. That you've arrived. Higat Lamalchut. You have arrived to this moment in your universe for a reason. So let's say you don't believe in God, and I don't believe in a God who cares whether or you believe in God. In fact, the God I believe in does not care if you believe in God. I wouldn't believe in such a petty God. So, can you just give me that water for a second? So, believe, however, in history. If you don't believe in God, I believe that you're alive, that you've arrived at this karmic moment in history because you, no matter who you are, has something to offer to this moment in time. Now, just think about how many times you've thought, oh my God, has it ever been this bad? Oh my God, could it get any worse? Who could listen to Rachel Maddow for one more minute and keep their sanity? Oh my God, can you follow what's going on with what's his name? And do you have a chart on your refrigerator about who is being indicted and who? It's like, oh my God, is it possible to not get overwhelmed with just following the news? Forget even having an opinion. By the time you form an opinion, it's moved on to an entirely different set of issues, and you can't even remember what your opinion was about the last set of issues, and now you've got to figure out the new set of issues, and then, oh my God, you open up social media, and somebody says, what's your opinion about X, Y, and Z? And you think, oh my God, I am about to issue a very thoughtful Facebook message about what I think about A, B, and C, and now we're up to X, Y, and Z. I can't handle it anymore. And then what do? We read more tweets and more Facebook and more, we listen to more MSNBC, and we feel like we're going crazy. We're living at a moment where it is exhausting. There is a sense of one day to the next, another piece of our universe being dismantled. Systems we imagine to be protecting us from something, or a vector we imagined ourselves going in, completely crashing. Here's what I think Purim has to say to us. Be joyful. It's Adar. We are told in the month of Adar, when Adar comes in, be happy. Now, only some of you are laughing. That means not all of you are feeling happiness. So I've got a few more things to say about that. Through the period of AIDS, CBST, like BCC, lost probably about 50% of our members, of our male members. About 50% died from AIDS. I imagine the numbers were similar here. Probably 75% of our men were HIV positive. Every Friday night, CBST, 2 or 3 Friday nights a month, we would have somebody else who had died from AIDS. We had people in the hospital, people visiting, people taking care of, people worrying about being ill, people mourning. And every Friday night, the ritual committee made a deep decision that no matter what was happening, we would not turn the Shabbat into a memorial service. That we would remember that at the center of the lesson Shabbat offers us, as Lisa so beautifully quoted God, is that Shabbat comes every week no matter what. And CBST made this commitment as a gay community which was suffering the plague with no support from the outside world, that no matter what was happening to us because of this tsunami, which for 17, 18, 19 years, we did not believe it would ever end. Who here remembers that time? It wasn't just that everybody was dying. It was also that we didn't think it would ever end. We thought this was the normal forever. We thought that we would look around the room, somebody was gone. Or somebody would walk into the room who was a little too skinny or had purple blotches on their face. And we knew it was a death sentence. And we thought it would never end. And CBST, like many gay communities, did not lose joy. How did we pull that off? Every Friday night we insisted that Shabbat remained a place to create space for Oneg Shabbat, for the joy of Shabbat, that we would not turn it into a memorial service. Jews throughout our history in Eastern Europe created the most fantastic humor and sense of humor in the midst of the most oppressive political and economic situation. How did we do that? How did Jews in America so quickly lose our sense of humor? It's up to gay Jews often to find humor. We now, in this moment of history, have to reclaim our Eastern European Yiddish sense of humor in the middle of disaster, and what we as a gay community learned so brilliantly then, which is that joy is an act of spiritual and political resistance. When we feel joy in the midst of the world in which we live, it's an act of resistance. It's an act of defeating the oppressor, so to speak. It's an act of saying we will not be defined by the external forces which are trying to crush us, whatever they may be. In Eastern Europe, we know what Jews lived through. And I'm talking before the Shoah, for 1,000 years of European history, what Jews lived with in Eastern Europe. And Jews built not cathedrals because we weren't allowed to build property. We didn't build massive monuments. We created a culture that was so rich and so dynamic and so full of joy and humor that it would outlast whatever forces were there to defeat us. The gay community knew this for years before there were any laws. Let's remember in 1972 and 1973, when the two oldest LGBT synagogues were formed, not a single Jewish organization in the world, not a single synagogue, not a single American Jewish Committee, American Jewish Congress, the Reform movement, the conservative movement, nobody said anything positive about being gay. The most positive thing in 1972 and 1973, when the two oldest gay and lesbian synagogues were formed, the only thing that was on the record since Leviticus was the Reform Movement Sisterhood in 1965 issued a resolution calling for the decriminalization of homosexuality. That was the best thing on the record since Leviticus. So how did Jews come together in 1972 and 1973 and insist that what the narrative was we were not going to accept that narrative to define us? Joy is an act of spiritual and political resistance. That's what it means in Adar when it says, when Adar happens, happiness comes in. We face the story of terrible oppression in Purim. The story of Purim is the overcoming of joy in the midst of terrible things. You have to feel joy even if you don't feel like it. People, listen to that. You have to feel joy even if you don't feel like it, okay? We've learned that from AIDS, but we also learned that from our worlds in which we live. The Friday after the 2016 election, I woke up, that whole week I woke up. But that Friday I woke up thinking, all week I have been feeling so vulnerable in this new America as a lesbian, as a woman, as a Jew. But Friday morning I woke up for a minute longer to think to myself, as much as I feel vulnerable in all the ways I feel vulnerable, how does a Muslim American feel this morning? The candidacy of this president was launched with an anti-Muslim speech. That's how he announced he was running for president, was a speech that attacked Muslims. So for a minute, I moved out of my sense of vulnerability and victimhood and feeling like on the bottom of the pile, and said, how does a Muslim American feel this morning? And I wrote to a couple of colleagues at the synagogue, asked Randy to join me, and we went to a mosque at NYU with the imam there I had a relationship with, and we made signs on the subway on the way over. I had one of our interns pick up 100 red roses from the flower district where CBST is located. I didn't know then, by the way, that you should dethorn long stem red roses before you give them to people. That's a good thing to know about, by the way. I'm just giving you that as a tip, okay? Dethorn long stem roses if you're giving them. I didn't know about that. So anyway, so we go in front of the mosque with signs that say, Jewish New Yorkers stand with our Muslim neighbors. There were 4 of us, 5 of us maybe, 100 roses. And we could see as the hundreds of Muslims start coming to Juma prayers, the Friday afternoon prayers, that as they see us, they feel, you could see fear in their faces. Because they're wondering who's standing there? Who's empowered or ennobled or feels encouraged by this election to be there? And you could see the fear. And then as they got close enough to see what our signs actually said, you could see these enormous smiles. And they came up to us. They hugged us. They took selfies with us. They wanted to send pictures to their mother in Pakistan or their father in Detroit or their sister in law school in New Haven to show them that there were some Americans. And there were 4 or 5 of us. It wasn't a huge effort with signs that said, LGBT Jewish New Yorkers stand with our Muslim neighbors. We handed out all 100 roses. Yes, I with the thorns, but we didn't mean anything by that. And then the imam came outside and said, there were thousands of people at prayer. They had them in many different rooms because everybody was feeling such fear. And he asked me to speak to these thousands of Muslims who were gathered on the Friday afterwards just to express solidarity and we're all in this together. That began a relationship where I said to our community, if we could get 3 congregants there every Friday, could we continue? Every Friday, just showing up. We can't change what's going on in America on a dime. It's going to take a lot of work. But we could show up with our Muslim neighbors who feel really targeted and really alone. Every single Friday since that day, we have had congregants and clergy standing in front of the mosque with signs. After 6 months, I went back to the imam and I said, listen, I don't want to wear out our welcome. You know, if you're kind of sick of us, you know, tell us we're done. It's okay. We've done our thing. We feel good. But if it's only for us, we don't really want to be here. I mean, yeah, we kind of do want to be here, but we're just checking in. And the imam said to me, no, you don't know what it has come to mean to every one of the worshipers who come to the mosque, that they can walk through this kind of gauntlet of love before they come into prayer. CBST, we started a whole Learning About Islam series because we didn't know anything about Islam, turns out. We expect everybody to know a lot about us as Jews, but it turns out we know very little about Muslims in America and Islam religiously. Then the Muslims started bringing us coffee and donuts as we stood there, and we stood there through the different weather. Then it came to be Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and they came to us and said, we'd like to come and do something at your services. 15 of them came to be ushers at our Yom Kippur services. So chances were, if you came to Yom Kippur, you were given a mahzor by a Muslim from this mosque. And then Pittsburgh happened. The first people I heard from were from that mosque. And they created a meetup group Thursday night of that week. They all gathered to make signs. 100 Muslims came to stand in front of CBST the Friday night after Pittsburgh with signs that said, Muslim New Yorkers stand with our Jewish neighbors. There were so many of them, we couldn't accommodate them. We have, it's New York City, we have a little storefront. We had to send them to other synagogues. We couldn't accommodate 100 Muslims standing in front of our synagogue, so they covered 3 other synagogues in the neighborhood. We couldn't change everything that's happening. What we could do is show up. These relationships have transformed people in the synagogue, and they've transformed the Muslim community. I invited the imam of the mosque to be our gay pride speaker last year. And he stood up in the synagogue and he said, some people might wonder why a straight Muslim religious leader would be at the gay synagogue celebrating gay pride. That's not a narrative most people think about as existing. He said, but a lot of people wrote us letters every time something bad happened in the news about Muslims. But it was the gay Jews who actually showed up. And because you showed up for me, I promise to you, I will continue to show up for you. Now it didn't take a lot of money to create this program. It doesn't take a lot of people. But it is our job to interrupt these narratives of hate that we have been all fed. It doesn't mean it's always easy. Doesn't mean we agree on everything, our two communities. But it means we look at each other really, really differently. Joy is an act of spiritual resistance. Anybody who stands with our group of people, and by the way, if any of you come to New York on a Friday, you're all welcome, 12:45 every Friday afternoon. We bring the signs. The Muslims usually provide the coffee or the hot cider. And you stand there for a half an hour or an hour, and then you go on your way every single Friday. Every single Friday. And I can tell you something. Any one of our members who does that, they're not depressed. They don't feel full of despair. Because what they are doing is making the difference in the life of somebody, a Muslim who's feeling really under attack in today's America. And those people, when we say Juma Mubarak to them, a blessed Juma to them, all the Muslims say back to us, Shabbat Shalom. And we get the blessings for Shabbat Shalom from them, and we give them Juma Mubarak. Now, is this changing everything in the world? Did it undo the Muslim bans that exist? Is it transforming what's happening to children on the border right now? Is it changing what's happening with the hatred of Muslims in America or anti-Semitism in America? Not exactly, but it's giving us something to do because we are alive at this moment. And as Mordechai said, if you are alive at this moment, you have the gift of doing something. No one can do everything, but everyone can do something. In 1944, Abraham Joshua Heschel published an essay. He, as you might know, got out of Europe in 1939 with a visa to go to Cincinnati and teach at HUC, a scholar's visa. He desperately begged America for visas for his mother and sisters who were left behind. He could not get them. Only he as a scholar, and since he wasn't married, he didn't have a wife or children to bring, he begged to get his mother and sisters out of Europe. He was never able to do it, and they were slaughtered. In 1944, only silence was reaching him from his family in Europe, and he knew exactly what was going on in Europe. He wrote an essay, and he said, what does this moment demand of us? Now think about this. He's writing in 1944, knowing what's happening in Europe. He said in this essay, as evil as the fascists are, we have to be that degree good. If you want to know what a response is to what's going on in Europe, Heschel said, you have to not only condemn what's happening with the fascists, you have to live your life with the degree of good that they are doing evil. That challenge remains with us today. How do we use our lives every day to be the reason people believe in the goodness of other people? How do we recognize that sinking into despair or depression is not a choice? So I'm telling you, Gewalt, Eden, don't despair. Don't despair. Joy is an act of spiritual resistance. When Adar comes in, happiness increases. It's not because we were victorious, I believe, and I think that part of the story is an add-on. I think it's trying to teach us how do we create joy in the midst of terrible, difficult times. Others have had it really hard. and we will have it really hard. And joy is an act of spiritual resistance. To the degree that the fascists are evil, we must to be that degree good. Sometimes the acts we do when we feel like staying in bed, burying our heads under the blankets, but we somehow get ourselves up to do something. Maybe that action won't result in the transformation of the whole world. Maybe that action will inspire one other person who sees you do it or is touched by what you're doing. And that person will do one other thing which will touch one other person, and on and on and on, until 25 people down the road, the person who's inspired can actually change the world. You have to believe that your actions will have the impact that you can't necessarily know. And I personally feel a great deal of joy when I think about that, because that gives us power and agency. On the second anniversary of the inauguration, we went back to the mosque, by the way, with 100 roses, but this time I learned you can order them dethorned. So you see, it's possible to keep learning. Shabbat shalom.